Well, thank you for showing up. And I'm gonna talk today about some research that we've been doing at the New York State Museum for the last several years, trying to better understand how the first indigenous peoples that archaeologists call Paleoindians came into the region in the late Ice Age, into a subarctic landscape. As archaeologists, of course, we're using artifacts, the things that they threw away or left behind, to infer human behavior. But in doing this research, we rely very heavily on earth scientist colleagues who have information on past climates, landscapes, animal prey populations, as all as components to better understand the ancient lifeways of these peoples. So we're trying to understand how and when the migration happened, how did they survive in the subarctic landscape, how they interact with each other, and how they were affected by the end of the Ice Age, which took place about 11,600 years ago, and that's when you see some really substantial climate changes. So we'll give you a little background on environment and archaeology. We'll talk about the setting of the Corditaipe site. We'll talk about its discovery and initial investigation. Then we'll talk about our field work that's ongoing and the insights that are starting to emerge from that. So these are the things we'll just do a thumbnail on very quickly. So if you're looking, this map is showing, done by my colleague Susan Stumby, shows the greater Northeast 13,000 years ago, and it's sort of setting the stage for people to come into the region shortly thereafter. So you're looking, don't have a pointer, so let's see. So here's the boundary at the last glacial maximum. That's how far south the ice sheet went in the last glacial advance. And at this time, you've still got a Laurentide ice sheet to the north, not that far from New York State itself. So we're still in the Ice Age, but that's where the footprint of the ice sheet is at that point. It's receded from the LGM position. That's the Atlantic coast. That's the Champlain Sea that borders northern New York. And those are the eastern Great Lakes, the lakes stages that are in those water bodies at that time. As people come into the landscape, we think, where did they come in from? Well, if you got an ice sheet to the north and Great Lakes water bodies to the west, it's pretty much given that they had to come into the region from the southwest, perhaps up the Ohio Valley. They may have come up through the Delaware and Hudson valleys, and they literally could have come up the continental shelf as well. So there are multiple possibilities for their entrance into the region. If you were flying over the upper Hudson at that time, you might see something like this. So it's a subarctic climate. The landscapes are mostly boreal parklands of spruce and tamarack and closed forests of spruce. And extreme seasonality. The summers are not that much cooler than today, but the winters are bitterly cold, 40, 50 degrees below zero. Here are some of the critters running around that landscape. So mastodons come into the region by 14,000 years ago, and they disappear based on Bob Faranik and Andy Kozlowski's dating. They disappear between 12,500 and 12,000 years ago. They're living there in part because they like to browse on spruce trees, and so that was easy eating for them. And we know, therefore, that they overlapped, were contemporaneous with Paleoindian peoples for at least 3 to 4 centuries, maybe longer. Here's another major species on the landscape, caribou. They came in before Mastodon, and they're still there when people come into the region. When they're in large herds, as they do today, they migrate long distances seasonally between forests and open settings. And this may have been a keystone species for these people. So here's a chronology. We have no radiocarbon dates on early indigenous Ice Age sites in New York yet, but we can determine the approximate ages of these sites based on the artifacts, especially these fluted points, which they're of course stone tips for hunting weaponry, and the kinds of features you look at are how deep that basal concavity is, how long the flutes are. Initially, they're short and shallow, and then they get longer. These points all generally have parallel parallel sides, and they date, we think, between about 12,800 and 12,200, and later in the Ice Age. You've got those points on the left where the flutes go all the way up to the tip, and the ones on the right where they have these very pronounced shoulders. And by the end of the Ice Age, around 11,600 years ago, for whatever reason, people stop making fluted points. It's no longer part of their technological repertoire. Here are the other kinds of tools that they carried with them in their toolkits: handheld tools and hafted tools. We'll talk more about most of these later in terms of the Corditaipe site itself. So this is the archaeology of these peoples. Most of these sites are very small. They might be half the size of a ranch house, a campsite marked by a scatter of stone tools and flaking debris from making and resharpening stone tools. We never find refuse animal bone on those sites because the soils are too acidic to preserve them over 12,000 plus years. Fire hearths, which would provide opportunities for radiocarbon dating, are also extremely rare. So basically, we interpret these sites as these seasonal camps of these people, maybe an extended family. Occasionally, they came together in larger groups, but they're moving around the landscape on foot a lot. So here's the Corditaipe site. It's located in the upper Mohawk Valley. And that's what that landscape looked like when those people started coming there. We think perhaps as early as 12,800 years ago. Here's the landform that they're visiting and spending time on. So this, you're looking at a drone view from 2022, and we're looking south. And to the right, in the trees here, is Oriskany Creek, a tributary of the Mohawk. And in the foreground, you're looking at this outwash plain, material that was deposited by the glacier as it was receding out of the valley. So here's a paper that Bob Funk and Beth Wellman published in 1984. They met Noel Strobino, an avocational archaeologist who lives a mile from the site he founded, by surface collecting that cultivated field that you just saw a drone image of, and he basically identified concentrations of artifacts. And they published this paper, very brief summary of what Noel Strobino had found at that time as of 1984. And then that was the limit of the initial research on the site. In 1985, Noel donated his collection to the museum. And we're going to go through that collection now and just talk about the major tool classes and what they're telling us. So here are some of the points on the top row, fluted points. You can see the flute scars here coming up from the base. These are unfinished fluted points that have been partially fluted, but they've broken during percussion flaking, so they weren't finished. The stone that they're using to make almost all their tools, we believe, comes from the south side of the Mohawk Valley, the so-called Onondaga Escarpment. There are various chert-bearing geologic outcrops there, and Chuck Verstraeten, our Devonian stratigrapher, has helped confirm that the stone that they're making the artifacts of is very similar to the stone shown here, which occurs as an outcrop along settings like this in a location called Barker Road that Noel Strobino identified. At the site, you've got these occasional freehand flake cores where they're using a baton or a hammerstone. They're knocking flakes off those cores to derive blanks to make stone tools from. Here's the most common tool type on the site: end scrapers. They make up 70% of Noel Strobino's collection. So the business end of this tool is up here. They're fan-shaped intentionally so that they can be inserted into a handle of bone or wood for giving you leverage when you're using that tool. And you can see that most of these tools, these end scrapers, even being made of the local Devonian stone. They're also being made of what's called Normanskill chert, which is a green tool stone that outcrops in the middle and upper Hudson Valley, not far from where we are, and then occasionally of this tool stone jasper that outcrops in the Delaware Valley. And that gives you a sense that at the very least, people are moving across much of eastern New York and perhaps interacting with people further south in the Delaware Valley. Here are some handheld tools. These are called side scrapers because they've just got little unifacial flake scars on one side of the tool, and it's handheld. It's not hafted. And that's elsewhere that's been determined to be a tool used for woodworking. These tools here with those tiny tips up top, they've been produced by very careful pressure flaking, and elsewhere people have done microscopic studies that indicate they're used for incising or drilling bone or wood. So that's in a nutshell the Noel Strobino's collection that he donated to the museum, and that kind of gave us expectations about what to find when we began investigating the site. So we started out, the only problem with Noel Strobino's surface collection is he didn't provenience it. He didn't group it by where it was come from. He just picked it all up and then donated it to the State Museum. So what we wanted to do when we started surface collecting the site in the spring, Susan, my co-author, is holding a GPS unit there. We wanted to provenience every artifact that we could find on the surface. And so that's what we're doing there during our surface collection. And we're in Locus 1, and actually you're going to see later our field work so far is focused right there. So here are some of the surface collected artifacts that were found during those initial years of investigation. And here's a map that illustrates where stone tools and flakes are found. The thing to focus on is the colored symbols, which represent different kinds of stone tools. And so there's the Oriskany Creek. There's that big outwash plain that we showed the drone view of before. Here's Locus 2, 3. Here's Locus 1. There's Locus 4. It's a little ironic because Bob Funk, when he published that paper, he called it a small site, and it's actually the biggest Ice Age site in eastern New York. If you look at the scale or over on the lower corner, you can see that Locus 1 is at least 80 meters across. So that's a very large site area, and there are 3 of them, and we think this probably represents repeated visits. They're coming back to the same locations over and over again and creating these very extensive artifact scatters. So we did the mapping and we thought, let's go back for a second. We became interested in Locus 1 because it had the greatest diversity of stone tool types there. We figured that would be the most productive area to begin investigating this site. And so we just started shovel testing on the east side of that field that you saw a moment ago. And my other co-author, Lexi DiCarlo, she's holding an end scraper in her right hand, and that was found in the 6th shovel test that we excavated along with a handful of flakes. And that kind of luck, I guess you could say, just never happens on these Paleoindian sites because the artifact density is typically very low. And so that was the 6th shovel test we excavated. And we started investigating this location. That's the fall of 2022. And what we're doing is now, instead of smaller shovel tests, we're opening up these meter or 3 by 3 foot units and screening the soils to get the artifacts. And of course, because we're standing on an Ice Age surface here, that outwash plain, all the artifacts are within 6 inches or the base of the plow zone. So that's just a map showing that same drone view of where the different loci area are. And here's our ongoing excavations in 2022. That's our fieldwork ongoing in 2023, and we're continuing to expand this block excavation. And some of these units have exceptionally high artifact densities for a Paleoindian site. And that reflects in part the fact they're doing a fair amount of tool manufacture as well as tool use at the site. One of our colleagues working with us is Matt Pertil. excuse me, he's a professor at SUNY Fredonia as a geoarchaeologist. And he's working with us. He collected samples in 2024 of soils, both in the site area of Locus 1 and outside of it, to look for trace elements of things like phosphates that could indicate animal butchery at the site, because here, as elsewhere on Paleoindian sites in New York, we don't have that preserved animal bone if they're doing any hunting. We still don't have any radiocarbon dated features, but on that top row, that's 4 of the fluted points that have been found so far. And based on their size, their shape, how they're being manufactured, that confirms for us that we are correct in thinking that this site dates to around 12,800 to 12,200. Lots of end scrapers. We expected that we would find a number because of Noel Strobino's collection, where they made up 70%. We've excavated 52 units in our block excavations so far, and we found 32 end scrapers in a continuous distribution that measures about 12 by 6 meters or 40 by 20 feet. That's interesting from a number of standpoints, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing we wanted to do was to get an initial handle on how are these tools being used. We expected them to be used for hide scraping, but that's why you do your research, to confirm your expectations or not. So Tom Lobel is an expert on high power microscopy of stone tools. He can identify the motion the tool was being used, the contact material that the bit was coming in contact with, and oftentimes you can see traces of evidence for hafting of the tool, if it's a hafted tool. So here's 5 tools. 2 on the left from Noel Strobino's collection, 3 on the right from our 2022 excavations, and his work showed that they're all being used for hide scraping, including both fresh hide scraping when the animal has just been killed, you've taken the hide off, you want to remove the tissue adhering to the inside of the hide, and they're also being used on dry hide as one of the last things you're doing to treat that hide, stretching it and softening it. Why are they doing this? Well, they're living in a subarctic environment. If you don't have warm clothing, you're obviously going to freeze to death when it goes down to 40 below zero. So this also carries some implications in terms of, there's examples of that's fresh hide polish on the base of the lower bottom of that end scraper there, and that's dry hide polish, which is much more brilliant. So it's obvious evidence so far that we've literally stumbled by luck onto a hide processing activity area with those dimensions that we talked about 40 by 20 feet. You would assume that's an outdoor task. It's not something you're going to be doing in the winter when it's 30 or 40 below zero in a shelter. And it also provides some possible suggestions of seasonality at the site, because in the fall, caribou hides, we know, are in their sort of peak condition. And if you're killing a caribou in the fall, that's the hide that you get from that is it's in its best condition for making clothing. And so this one interpretive scenario here is they come to this site in the fall on an annual, perhaps at least a periodic basis, and this is one of the major tasks that's going on at that site. Who's doing that? When you look at the ethnographic record of Arctic and subarctic hunter-gatherers that anthropologists and historians recorded back in the 19th century and the early 20th century, if they're hunting large mammals, they're using those hides for clothing, and traditionally that's a practice that women are processing those hides and turning them into clothing. And so that suggests that this hide working area is a gendered use of space at that locus 1. What else is going on at locus 1? That's the larger question we have, because we think we're probably going to come out of the limits of that hide working area soon in our investigation. The other kinds of new insights that we're getting is on the technology itself. There are only, Corditaipe is the 6th site in New York from the Ice Age that's been investigated by controlled excavation to get representative samples rather than just surface collection. And so we're seeing rare tools that are uncommon, and we're also seeing, in this case, a tool that has not been seen before on sites like this of this age in the Northeast. So this is a flake. That's the top of the original flake. That's the bottom of the original flake. That's the bifacial edge that you're seeing edge on here, and it's also over here. So basically, this tool has been rolled right to left across here. That's the back or the flat surface on the tool. So you see these in the Upper Paleolithic elsewhere in the world, and that back, the purpose of having that flat surface is so if you're holding this tool by hand, because there's no evidence it's hafted, that basically cushions your forefinger as you're using it to cut or scrape. We expect that these are probably handheld cutting tools. And we have a grant that we've recently obtained that is going to provide us with a basis not just for doing microscopic analysis on sites like this in New York, but also look for residue, preserved protein residue that could be related to the animals these people were hunting and processing. So we're looking forward to expanding this analysis and getting more information. So we're going to be doing field work back at this block excavation in May in 2025. We're also going to be doing shovel testing. As you can see here to the right, that's in 2024. And that shovel testing, that's at about every 15 feet. And we're looking to find out what else is going on around the hide working area that we've documented so far. So here's some of our crew from last May. And if you want to join us, talk to me. And I want to thank these people, the Oneida Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Jesse Bergevin, who's been very supportive and enthusiastic about this work, the landowners, the Lenahans, the Humphreys, who farm that field, and then the Corditaipe volunteers. This is all volunteer labor. We've had about 50 volunteers, and if it wasn't for them, I would not be talking to you about this research today. So very grateful for their help, and thanks for your attendance.